Well, good morning, everybody, and thanks for joining us here for one more session on a topic that I don't think could be any more hyped. If you think private LT is hyped, AI and what we can do with it is the most hyped topic that I think is covering not just our industry, but every industry in general. And so today, with the panel, we wanted to dig into what's going on in the space and how are utilities actually deploying this technology. So I'm Matt Olson, Vice President at Burns & McDonnell Engineering for our telecom practice. And joining me is
Basit Malik with Fieldforce.
Ali Mohammed with the New York Power Authority.
Caleb Murphy with Sempra SDG&E.
So to get the conversation started, I was asking the team in preparation, what are some of the applications today that you've been working on, and how are you deploying them with AI? And we'll also include machine learning in this conversation as well. So Caleb, I think you had a great example.
Yeah, so we're really pushing forward with advancement of AI and ML within the company, even looking at processing rate case information using these technologies. It's really good at taking a lot of information and making it succinct. You got to make sure it's giving you the correct answer, though, and we'll talk more about that. But to kind of bring it home to this conference and what we're here talking about mainly, broadband field communications. One of the use cases that we have is related to processing images of our electric structures in the field. And mainly this is around making sure that we're maintaining these assets correctly. We call it our intelligent imaging processing system. And what we're doing is flying drones, getting high quality images of these poles, towers, structures, but also putting phones on the dashboards of trucks as they drive around, taking those pictures, sending them back to a processing point, taking all these images and gathering them into one store, and then learning from them, processing them to identify the different characteristics of those poles. Where's the transformer? Where's the different power systems equipment, the insulators, the wires, and then what could be failing on those that could be creating more risk, whether it's wildfire risk or reliability risk. And what we found is that these tools do really well, but they have to be guided. So we're taking people, qualified electrical workers that have done this for years and years, and they're looking at the output from these systems and making sure that it's giving us good guidance and retraining the systems to give us better guidance. So information flows in from the field to a processing point, and then we also need to get that information back out to the field, to these field workers.
So a couple of key things I'm hearing in there. I think a key one, human in the loop. Back to that question of, do you trust AI? It is really good at processing large amounts of information, but it doesn't always know whether or not it's correct. One thing that not everybody is aware of is AI is typically a statistical process. It's not. It will present something to you, and sometimes people confuse precision with accuracy. The wording might be very nice. It might be perfectly formatted. It might have perfect grammar, and it might be telling you the completely wrong answer, because what it's doing is looking at the trained data set and trying to do a statistical match to that. So if you have access in your AI model to look at its confidence interval, that's a really key thing to look at to train those models. But I wanted to highlight again that human in the loop aspect of it. You can train it to be really good, but you might ought to watch it for a little while, and you might also want to watch it throughout its duration to see if it gets new information that might start dragging it off course. So Basit, you want to comment on how you've been taking these same field ideas, not just in operations, but into construction and deployment?
Absolutely. So one of the things we do is we digitize the process of deploying and maintaining infrastructure. So whether it's utility infrastructure or telecom infrastructure, we are digitizing the people and process piece. We provide the technology which digitizes the people and process piece. So you can get information from sensors, but there is a lot of digital information related to maintaining infrastructure and deploying infrastructure and things like pictures that you need to collect. So we have been training our AI model, and it's in a private repository. And Matt, as you mentioned, right, it's important that this data is not exposed to the public cloud because a lot of times this is proprietary information. So we are working on training our machine learning models on how can we start predicting where failures are going to happen based on historic information as well as the current information which is coming in from various activities like maintenance and operations, whether it's preventative or whether it's corrective. What that allows us to do is the model predicts what is the probability of something failing in the next 3 months, 6 months, so you can focus more resources over there. Now, is it always accurate? No, because it's going to take time to build credibility of the model, training the model. And a very important job description in this is of a prompt engineer. So I think prompt engineers and data scientists are very important in this process to make sure that the model is continuously learning, and if it's making mistakes, they're able to correct those mistakes as well. Because as you said, it's a statistical model. And this, from our perspective, is going to increase the time to market for a lot of things that executives are doing right now. So we want to have a natural language interface where someone can go in and ask a question, which of my assets are predicted to fail in the next 6 months? And they get certain responses with probabilities where you can then go in and prioritize your efforts on those particular assets. You can also use it to manage employees. Like someone can go in and ask a question, who should I give the best employee award to this month? And based on a model, it can actually predict that which employees should be awarded this year based on their performance. So there are a lot of different applications for AI, both from a grid perspective, getting more intelligence from the grid, but also from a people perspective on how to actually move your teams better.
So you were hitting on in there data structures, the need for data. When you're going to be building AI models, you have to have a data source. AI is amazing at processing through large volumes of data and bringing insight out of that data. If you don't have the data, and you may have data, but if it's not digitized, if it's not accessible to the model, I will say traditionally you think of it having to be cleaned and well organized, and I'm going to get to Ali in a second on how NYPA has been doing that. It's getting a little better at being flexible in the data structures. You can have a little fuzzier connections between data sources. One that comes up, if you're talking about polls, I would like all of you guys to think about how well can you go between all of your systems and all of your assets and know whether or not they're actually on the same structure or they're the same physical asset. You think, oh, of course we know this. But if you start digging into it, thinking of the differences, how we name polls, where we name polls, how we classify assets in those different systems, and then you were to compare all of them, you don't always get a perfect match. It's getting a little better at being able to apply some fuzzy logic in there to make that work. But Ali, can you pick up on what did NYPA do to get their data ready for this revolution, and how's it been going? Can you describe that process?
So before I get to that, you mentioned how we can predict the failure of assets as long as you have the right data, the asset history, the maintenance history. That just took me back 10 years when I was an intern. We were putting a capital program together, and we had to look and assess the condition of the asset. And this was all a manual process. We didn't have AI back then. Not everything was digitized, so I started creating spreadsheets. That's the best thing we do, right? As engineers, create spreadsheets of all the assets within the substations in the northern New York region, drove out there with the engineering team, visual assessment, looked at the maintenance records, and then came up with a plan for the next 5 years on what assets need to be prioritized. But now, when it comes to alarms and stuff, operators get hundreds and thousands of alarms a day. So we do have advanced pattern recognition, which is a form of AI that we implemented at NYPA, which basically prioritizes the alarms for the operators to look at. The rest is white noise that can be, could be a secondary inspection, could be, or could be eliminated and not looked at all. So we started doing that, but what we need is structured data. There's a lot of data out there, whether it's in your shared drives, whether it's in your emails, whether it's in paper copies. NYPA went about and put a program together called the data governance structure to just look at what are the different data sets do we have, the source of truth, and some of the unstructured data sets. It took us almost 4.5 years to clean our data sets for the structured data first, which are SAP, Maximo. So all of our data is in Maximo. And it took us, when we did that first, when we first initiated the program, we wanted to understand how clean the data is. And these are assets are our bread and butter. We generate revenue, using these assets. The data quality index for that was 69%. And we were shocked. We were like, we didn't expect it to be that low. So every site has different resources that are entering data. One, it's not consistent. So even the phone number, sometimes when you add in the manufacturer's phone number, it's in 100 different formats. So we went in and cleaned the structure of that field. Then we went in and identified when was the equipment installed and how many work orders have been issued against those. Cleaned that data set up. Then we looked at the actual installation cost, and we added in the O&M aspect of it to make an educated decision is, do we just keep fixing the problem, or is it time for us to replace the asset? So it was a journey that we went through, and that was just one source of truth, like Maximo, right? We started with SAP, it's a nightmare. So, we're going through that process, but time by time, we started with 40 asset classes that we have completed, and now when we look at our data, it's at 99% DQI, which is, you cannot get to 100, but we have a structure in place now where the system recognizes that the data was entered incorrectly. So whoever enters the data gets a notification that, hey, something is wrong here, take a look. If within 2 weeks, the data is not fixed, the manager gets a notification that one of your employee has not gone in and fixed the data. 2 weeks later, if it's still not fixed, the regional manager gets the notification that there's an issue with the data set, have your employees look at it. So now we put governance in place to make sure that we are consistent, we are accurate, and it's timely going into the system. Because like you said, garbage in, garbage out. We are trying to put all these applications out there. If you don't have good data, you won't have good results.
So we've talked about the data and the need for clean data. I think the next question that always comes up anytime we talk about AI is it safe, and how do we protect the data? Can you guys talk to the audience a little bit about what are your organizations doing to make sure that you have access to the data to use AI, but I think everybody's big fear is that some employee is going to download some massive data set from one of the internal systems and then go over to ChatGPT and upload it and say, please summarize and tell me, and it will do a fabulous job of doing that for you. The challenge is it's going to remember that. And there's been a couple of fairly famous cases where one organization's employees uploaded a bunch of their internal research documents and was asking to do summarizations for it, producing great quality results. However, now anybody else in the world could also search for the same query and get the same answers. So I think that's the big fear with data. What are you guys doing to give accessibility to that data, but also enable these AI models to be accessible to employees?
You want me to start?
Absolutely.
With there's two ways that I want to answer the question. One is utilities have, one thing that they like is control. So we put controls in place for access of data. We call it the Amazon shopping cart for data. we have a portal where you go in and request access to data set. If you're not from a particular department, say electrical superintendents have their own data sets that they have access to. If they have to go access the mechanical department's data set, they have to request access. They just don't have access to it now anymore. And now we have, from a data governance standpoint, we have the custodians, the stewards, the owners, the consumers, roles identified within each business unit. The custodians will grant you access, first level, understand why, justifications to why you need access to the data, what is it that you're looking to solve or not solve. Second level goes to the data owner, ensuring that there is control in place of 2 checks and balances, and that's when you get access to data for applications. On the other end, you talk about ChatGPT, right? We can go on your phone and enter, what can NYPA do with respect to EVs? I mean, we asked that question, actually. It gave a response considering our state legislative challenges, and being a state authority, gave a good answer. But then there's another incident where a lawyer used ChatGPT, but every reference that it used for a citation were all wrong, nothing related to the case. So how do you know if the data is good or not? So from a security standpoint, we have put guardrails in where ChatGPT is blocked on our end. If you have to use ChatGPT for work, provide a justification that will be reviewed by cyber team as well as the rest of the IT leadership, and that's when you get approval to use it. So you're controlling access to the data to begin with, which is private and confidential. B, you're trying to limit applications that will expose your data to the open public. So there's 2-way approach that we have taken at NYPA.
Yeah. And at SDG&E, it's a brave new world. These technologies are scary when you look at them. In some ways, we've been dealing with similar problems for a long time, and we have policies, we have guidelines at our company, at all of our companies. We've been actively working on training employees about what's confidential data, what's proprietary, where to put that data and where not to put that data. Realistically, there's so many different places where our employees have and could put data on the internet for years and years and years. These tools make it a little more intriguing though, right? So as a company, we've developed a center of excellence around AI, ML, and these types of technologies to review the existing guidelines and policies and make sure that they meet the future need, but also to set patterns, to control data, and educate on where it's proper and how to expose data in a confidential and a secure manner, but also how to take that data back in and make sure that that processing that happened isn't misleading you or misleading whoever is looking at those results. So there's a lot of training involved here. And I think if we don't get out there and help the average everyday employee understand how to use these technologies in the proper way, there's always going to be a way for these employees to find a way to get this data out there. So training is number 1, policy is number 2, but also enabling this type of technology within the company instead of pretending it's not there, we'll come back to it later. These are going to be big drivers for the business and efficiencies and keeping the utility profitable and meeting the rate payers' needs for years to come.
I want to evolve the conversation on, so I'm going to go to the next question. We have about 10 minutes. I want to save some time for question, but I want to get to the biggest question probably in the room, and that is, how do you engage your staff that think that the only reason that you're talking about AI is so that you can get rid of them, or that it's going to eliminate their job, or that's always kind of we've talked about what you can use it for, and how do you create it, and how do you secure it, but there's a big component left, and that is how do you engage your organization so that everybody isn't freaking out about this is here to displace me?
That's a great question. I think there are 2 components to this. So as Caleb was mentioning, one is employees are today trying to figure out a way on how to use ChatGPT and sort of upload data, right? So there is an employee population which needs access to tools like these to get their job done, right? And if they cannot use ChatGPT, they would find another way. And the way to address it is for utilities to actually build internal tools using some of these models which are available, which keep the data secure. Like the question that Ali mentioned, that what should NYPA do to increase EV, or what should the NYPA EV strategy should be? I mean, that's an answer which would have typically taken several weeks and several employees to figure out, and you got a response in 5 seconds, right, on that. That's a very powerful capability, and there are going to be a lot of employees who need that capability to do their jobs better. On the other hand, there is skepticism as well, that is AI going to take my job away? I think AI is a force multiplier. Given the requirements on the grid, the increase in requirements because of EVs over the next 30 years, there's a labor shortage. So AI basically enables you to leverage the employees that you have today to deliver far more than you have been able to do in the past. So I think those are like two big components from my perspective to talk about with employees when they have concerns about AI.
Absolutely.
Yeah, one way that we frame this, or I've heard it framed this way a lot, and I really like the messaging here, two different ways. We think of it as giving our employees superpowers, right? It's not taking something away from them, it's giving them something that they don't have today. It's giving them access to data that they need on the spot and clearly formatted in a concise way for them to digest quickly. Another way to think of it is having a fellow partner employee with you all the time, sitting next to you at your desk or sitting in the truck with you, who, when you have a question, can get the heart of that answer to you really quickly. So it's enabling an employee to do more, to do it faster, and to not drown in the laborious things that none of us like to do. So I kind of like that idea. Don't get me wrong, it's going to change jobs, but it also gives the right employees a means to upscale and do something that they like doing, do something different, do something more productive for the company.
One thing is, yes, the job shortage, but the other is, how many employees can a company even hire, right? You always have that limitation as well. When it comes to AI or any emerging technology, when we are looking to implement, first thing, and I think we talked about this the previous panel and the ones before too, change management. It's that education piece that needs to happen. We are enabling you with these like superpowers, like the tools that will make your job more efficient. There might be some mundane tasks that you don't have to do anymore, where you can focus on newer projects or newer technologies or something different. And upskilling is a piece, right? So when, one of the concerns we always have between, management and utilities union is, hey, job security, right? This is something that we have been doing for the past 50 years, and this is what we will do. It's part of our MOU, it's part of our agreement and contracts. When we rolled out the drone program within NYPA, we ensured that our union staff were part of this rollout. We have trained, I don't know the number at this point, maybe like 40 people, 50 people in the company to become drone pilots, Part 107 for now. But there are union employees that are part of this. So we have linemen that are out there that have the ability to use the technology to capture photos. Instead of climbing the towers, now they can use the drone to look at, do a visual inspection. But they're using the tools today. It's about collaboration. When you roll something out, make sure that they're part of it. Second, the educational piece is much needed so they understand what is in it for them. Once they understand that, then it's easy. And that's any transformation. But
yeah, I always go back to the topic. It's AI is not doing the knowledge. Is this on? AI is helping you do the laborious tasks, the reporting out, the summarizing, the detailing, or helping you do the checking. I have a story. where I do a lot of presentations, and I took a presentation, I extracted the text for it, I loaded it up into one of the private LLMs that we have, and I asked it, what did I not address? It said, you spent all of this time talking about how we're going to collect video as part of our projects for ML processing and pictures. It said, you didn't talk about audio at all. And I'm like, why would we even have audio? But then you start thinking about it. Well, you can learn just as much about a system from the audio signature as you can from, I would have never, ever probably come up with that, nor probably anybody that I was presenting to would have called me out and said, hey, you're thinking about some other aspect. I have no idea how AI knew about that. Obviously, it correlated some data that other people were talking about, or maybe it knows that every video has audio. I don't know. But it was starting to ask the question about why had you not addressed that? So you can use it in many, many different ways. At this point, we have a couple minutes here left. I'd like to open the floor up to questions. Please come up. I know somebody's got to have a question about AI technology. Or I'd like to also hear, how are you guys using it as well? Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Robert Cunningham from AvantGrid. I'm wondering how your data sets are dealing with various biases for gender, racial, as well as handling IP information that might have been leaked from another company and might now be in yours that you're not allowed to use.
So I think 2 questions in there. Anybody want to take on?
Can you repeat the question?
I think the first question is bias, and how are we managing bias in our data sets?
For utilities in this particular use case, the way this LLM needs to work is trained on your private data and not on the public data, as we talked about before as well. So when it comes to things like IP, gender bias, etc., it needs to run on the data that you have trained it on. So this is not running on the global chat GPT data. This is running on your specific data, and that's very important from an IP protection standpoint because you might inadvertently infringe on information which is available, which you were not supposed to use. So it's important for IT organizations at the utilities to build their internal models. And as I mentioned, the model does develop biases as well. It's important to manage that, and it's important to have this skill set on the team which can address those biases if they come up in the model. They're inevitable, but they need to be managed. And it needs to be run in a private environment, not in a public environment.
If you're not thinking about hiring or having an ethicist involved in your implementation of AI, I would have never thought that we as an organization would be hiring a ethicist to help us in these matters, but they're now part of the QC process about checking those questions. And then I think the second part of that question was around how do we make sure that we're not, how are we managing the property rights or the copyrights of data and making sure that it is truly data that we've collected or were our employees, our organization versus other organizations or just generally the internet's. Can you guys talk about any processes that you've had to change or things?
I mean, we do have data from other utilities too, right? Maybe not 100% proprietary, but something that's still confidential that we cannot share. We are under NDAs. But I think mostly, when we share our data, sometimes we even anonymize that data. So even if, say, suppose there's a breach, we don't know where the data is from. The location, like a power plant, right? The location is out, what the name of the power plant is out. So things like that we take out completely before we actually share the data with external partners, especially when you're looking at AI, ML use cases, because you're trying to get insights, not insights about the area or the location, right? So we anonymize data before we send it out. But there are instances like we're working on building the digital twin of the New York State electric grid. So we have some data from our distribution partners that we're looking to pull into, but that is completely on a separate server, and it is not tied to our business network at all. The entire lab it has its own standalone network, and it's not even tied for a second to our business, our operations network. So it's completely separate.
Yeah, I would say for Burns & McDonnell, we've had to add data provenance fields to data when it comes in. For instance, we went through our entire network and brought over all of the photos that we own, or that we have. I won't say we necessarily own all of them. But then, as part of that process, we had to go through and identify who has the copyright on those photos. Where did those photos come from? Were they ones that our employees took? Were they ones that were conducted as part of projects that we conducted? Are they projects that partners or clients shared with us? Do they have any restrictions with them? So there's now a bunch of extra data fields that belong with each bit of data that start to talk about what is the provenance of this data and what can it be used for. And things are now flagged. They have confidentiality agreements associated with them. They are items that we own the copyright on versus we don't own the copyright on this. And so then when you get over to the data request, it's like, what are you going to use this data for? Are you going to use it to train a model? Are you going to use it to do some processing? Do we have all the right? And that's one of the questions that gets asked when you make a data request is what fields and how are you checking that data? And right now, unfortunately, until we implemented some of those new processes, a whole bunch of that data did not have the proper provenance information associated with it. And so that has to be excluded from some of the uses that are being proposed. If we don't own the copyright, we're not training data models on it, is one of the examples. Now, only like 15% of our data has where we truly know where the copyright came from that, because we only started tracking it a few years ago. This wasn't something that we'd done for years and years and years. So.
Yeah, I think this is a problem that we've dealt with for a long time, right? It's easy to process data now, but we've had data available to us, and we've got to figure out if we trust that data or not. And just, I know we're out of town, just really quick, I think the one other thing we haven't talked about is, as a utility, we own a lot of our customers' data. And years ago, we've put together a culture and really an office of ownership around customer privacy. So it doesn't matter if we're entitled to that data or not. It is our role as a utility to keep our customers' data private, especially outside of the company, but even within the company, making sure that the right people within the company have access to that data, but no more than those who need it.
So as we wrap up here, maybe again, one comment, what would be the thing that you would recommend organizations think about as they're thinking about their AI journey? I'll start with Basit.
So from my perspective, AI is one of the biggest revolutionary technologies that we have seen. I think it's very important for companies to have a forward-looking strategy on AI. And I think tying this to broadband and what we've been talking about here with private LTE and other broadband technologies, you cannot have an AI strategy if you don't have a data strategy and a communications layer, because that's what's going to be used to run AI. So it's a critical imperative from my perspective that if anyone's looking to be successful in AI over the next few years, we need to get the communication highways set up. Otherwise, the AI strategy would not work.
I mean, that's foundational, right? Infrastructure. You know, we talk about electricity, flow of electrons. For data, you know, it's a flow of data for us for communications. I would say embrace the change, embrace the technology, but in a more safer environment, because technology is evolving, and when we talk about grid of the future, you have so many other new technologies coming out. So it's about how effectively, in a controlled environment, do you roll those out, the safer you are, and you get the full benefit and value out of it.
I agree with everything you've all said. You've got to embrace it now and don't delay. But one other slant on this is these technologies are going to be a way to attract and retain talent for years to come. Might even be that the next generation of workforce looks for these types of tools to enable them for success in the roles that they take on. So it could be the way to attract the right talent and keep the right talent at our companies.
Well, thank you very much for every moment of insight that you guys have shared today, and can I get a round of applause for our panel?